You're listening to the Sex and Psychology Podcast, the sex ed you never got in school and won't get anywhere else. I am your host, Dr. Justin Lehmiller. I am a social psychologist and research fellow at the Kinsey Institute and author of the book, Tell Me What You Want, The Science of Sexual Desire and How It Can Help You Improve Your Sex Life. We have a tendency to think about sexual orientation as a fixed identity, something clear, stable, and easy to define. The truth, however, is that sexuality doesn't fit into neat and tidy boxes like that. There are countless individuals whose behaviors don't align perfectly with the labels they use to describe themselves. For example, as we'll discuss in today's show, there are actually a lot of men who identify as straight, yet find themselves drawn to secret sexual encounters with other men. So let's dive into that hidden world. We're going to talk about the psychology behind why a heterosexual man might want to have sex with other men, why male same-sex behavior is more stigmatized than female same-sex behavior, how people reconcile the gap between behavior and identity, as well as what all of this tells us about the true complexity of human sexuality. I'm once again joined by Kathy Kay, host of the Strictly Anonymous podcast and author of the new book, Strictly Anonymous Confessions, Secret Sex Lives of Total Strangers. This book is a collection of real, unfiltered stories from people revealing their most private sexual thoughts and experiences. This is going to be another fascinating conversation that you won't want to miss. Stick around and we're going to jump in right after the break. If you're looking to gain a broad understanding of human sexuality or refresh your knowledge, check out the next Human Sexuality Intensive at the Kinsey Institute. Participants will explore foundational concepts and recent developments across a range of topics related to human sexuality through an interdisciplinary, evidence-based lens. Topics will include sex, gender and sexuality, identity and intersectionality, sexual behavior and consent, dating and relationships, and more. This course is open to both emerging and established professionals looking to specialize their knowledge, as well as those seeking new career directions. Previous participants have come from all over the world, and those who successfully complete the program will receive a course certificate from the Kinsey Institute. The next intensives will be in May and June of this year. To learn more, visit kinseyinstitute.org or check the link in the show notes. Okay, Kathy, let's dive into more sex confessions. So one of the most fascinating themes in your book is the number of confessions you've received from men who identify as straight or heterosexual, yet who are engaging in or fantasizing about same-sex encounters in secret. So can you give us a sense of how common this is? How often do you hear about this kind of thing?
I hear about it a lot. And it's one of my favorite things to talk about because it really bothers me that there is this stigma that still exists when it comes to guy-on-guy action, whether the person's bisexual or not, or, whatever. And what really bothers me is that it's even prevalent in the lifestyle, the place where you would think, oh my God, these people are so open. Even there, it still isn't. I don't understand it. I have so many guys calling into my show, and I used to be confused until I had Dr. Joe Court on my show. Do you know? I'm sure you know him, right?
Joe's been on the show several times.
Oh my God, I'm obsessed. Brilliant genius. And I repeat what he told me so many times to other guys, and they're like, oh my God, you finally put it into words, and it's really him. And he talked about like the difference between sexual orientation and erotic orientation, and I used to get all these guys that would call in and be like, oh my God, sometimes I really like to suck a D, you know what I mean? And like, this is what they're doing on the deal or whatever. He's like, but I'm not into guys, you know what I mean? But I don't like guys. Like, I don't like guys and I don't like guys. And I'd be like, I don't understand, because there was for a while for me, I didn't even understand it. I'd be like, no, that means you're bi. And they'd be like, but I'm not into guys, and then Dr. Joe Court explained it all. I think he went viral on TikTok by saying like, guys could hook up with guys and not be bi or gay or anything. They could still be straight. And it was like, of course that went viral because it doesn't make sense, but it does when he explains it, right?
Yeah, and we'll get into that more as we go along here. But maybe you can start by telling us a little bit more about, what some of these stories look like. You just mentioned like some guys will say like, hey, I just want to suck a D, right? Well, so how does this play out?
I don't want to scare your audience because it's sad because I feel like because there is still a stigma, a lot of the guy-on-guy stuff is happening on the DL, right? Mm-hmm. And that's the sad part of it, right? Like, I don't want to scare the wives out there that are listening, but I mean, sometimes the stories that I hear from these guys of what they do the minute their wife goes on a work trip or they're on a work trip, I'm like, oh my God. If their wife knew, And sometimes I also tell my guy friends, like, if you like blowjobs, you should just open yourself up because there's so many guys out there that like to give. A lot of times I've found that in that realm of these guys that aren't necessarily bi or whatever, and they're straight, they really like to be the giver, right? As opposed to the receiver. There's all these guys that just sometimes want to suck a D, right? Like that's what they're into. And a lot of times, they're doing it on the DL or it's a fantasy of theirs because they can't admit it because of this stigma. And that's like one of the biggest topics on my show is these guys that do this. And unfortunately, like I said, I don't want to scare your audience, but unfortunately, it's a lot of times these guys are doing it behind their partner's backs, whether they're dating or whether they're married, And I do find, and I don't know if this is a real thing in your world, but like sometimes when a guy gets to be about 50, a lot of times when I'm talking to a guy or right around the 50-year age range, he's at the point where he's just like so sick of keeping whatever secret life he has a secret. Like the guy in my book that was very bi, Mike, he, at the point where he turned 50, he was like sick of hiding it. And now he's like sort of out and proud. And the next time he gets in a relationship, he just wants to be upfront about it because, he hates to have to hide it. And unfortunately, that's something that guys are doing. And, listen, I was born in a time where there was a stigma on girl action, right? In my lifetime, that changed. And then the minute it changed, it was like every girl was like, oh my God, I have a girl crush, right? But that hasn't really happened for guys. So I feel like they're still keeping it very much on the DL. I think the younger generation is more open, but I have so many guys calling up to confess. I have a confessions line that people can call 24/7. And, I just went in yesterday and had like 50 confessions I had to download. And I mean, so many of them are like, I'm a guy and this is what I like to do. And a lot of times, there's a lot of guys out there that had like experiences. A lot of times it happened in an experience like in high school, like all those stories that you hear, they happen to guys in the past, and I don't know if they get wired into it for that way, but I think it just like a lot of girls are like, I have a girl crush. A lot of guys, once in a while want to be with a guy. It's like, well, it's just a thing. And I happen to think, I mean, you work at Kinsey, right? Like, I mean, that Kinsey scale, how many people are totally hetero or totally homo? Don't most people live somewhere in the middle?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of depends on how you want to parse the numbers there. I mean, you do tend to find
most people on the ends.
Yeah, most people will be kind of like on one of the ends, right?
Yeah.
But you do have a lot of people who are in the middle. There's more variability than people might expect. But it's also sometimes hard to interpret some of those findings because there's a lot of people who have a lot of hangups about this idea that maybe I do have some same-sex attraction or something, but they don't want to identify as anything other than heterosexual or indicate that even on like an anonymous survey. And so the truth of exactly where people lie and are situated on something like the Kinsey scale, I don't know if we know the answer for sure, just because there's still that taboo around same-sex attraction. But yeah, you mentioned a lot of things that are really interesting here. And one is that, a lot of this is occurring in secret in the context of infidelity. And infidelity is a whole other separate beast, right? And that's something that we consider to be in the realm of non-consensual, non-monogamy. We know that does happen. There's certainly that infidelity aspect sometimes here. But also, I was thinking as you were speaking about how I have some gay friends who actually prefer to hook up with straight guys. Like that's their thing. Like it's almost kind of like their kink. And I think there's lots of interesting reasons why some gay men are really into straight men. And part of it is just because like they sort of fetishize the straight guy idea. And, there's some sort of masculinity thing that I think kind of goes along with that. But also sometimes it's like just not having to worry about the possibility of too much emotional investment or connection because that a straight guy is just going to want to do it on the DL and it's not going to go anything deeper than that. Right. But it's an interesting thing. Like there's lots of straight guys out there who want to have sex with other men and lots of gay guys who are like, yeah, I'm really into straight guys. So something for everybody.
I have a couple in my book, Sean and Samantha, and I love the couple stories where the guy is into guys and he's out and told his wife, because those are always super interesting because there's no infidelity going on, right? Here are guys that actually cop to it, actually told their wives, and their wives have, not only accepted it, but sometimes joined in and watched it. And to their surprise was very turned on by it. Look at the whole, what's that hockey thing that's going on right now?
Yeah, heated rivalry.
Yeah. I mean, so I love those stories. And Sean and Samantha, they brought guys in, and she brought guys in for her guy. And the one of their favorite guys that was coming in to hook up with them was a gay man.
Mm-hmm.
just so you like you said, so I love, like I said, when I get the openly, I don't know, you want to call them straight guys that are into guys that have told their wives and they play together. And instead of having an MFM, they're having MMFs, right? And like I said, sometimes that can't happen in a swinger club because they're still anti that. They're doing it in their private life. And a lot of times it's the hardest thing for them to bring up and admit to their wives. And sometimes I've had even wives on, I love to get their perspective, that they've been very afraid. Like, what if I'm not turned on by him? Like, what if I see him as quote unquote weak or whatever? But across the board, it's always like the exact opposite. They see their husband as hotter. They realize they're totally into it, once they actually experience it. And I have like the most alpha guys on my show that are here to say, like, raise their hand. This is what I'm into. It doesn't mean anything. It just is what it is, right? Sometimes they're into being with a guy, and when they could be out and proud about it, I think that's the ultimate place where you want to be. And I love those stories because it shows other people like, you can, I think it's a hard thing to bring up, especially if you've been with someone for a long time and never copped to it, but plenty of people do wind up doing that. And their partner received it, and it was an okay thing. Sometimes they play, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they mock it up and they could role play it at home. There's all different types of ways to do it, but it's great to be able to be like open about your stuff with your partner.
Yeah, and I was actually going to ask you about the female perspective here, because sometimes it's not just about the guy is interested in exploring his sexuality in some way. Sometimes it's his female partner who's like, oh, it would really turn me on to like see you with another man. And that has me thinking about how, there's this whole body of research finding that a lot of straight women are actually really into watching gay male porn, right? And so this might sort of be an extension of that, where they can kind of like see it in real life in some way, because a lot of women are just turned on by the idea of two men being together.
Yeah. And like I said, I've had the women on who had no clue. I had one that was very nervous about it. At first, she thought she wasn't going to enjoy it. And then she like loved it. I've had the partners that were like, oh my God, like that's something that I've always watched. Like they didn't even know that their female partner was always watching gay porn and was into it. It turns out that a lot of women have always known that they were into it, right? And so if their partner comes to them, they're totally accepting of it. And like I said, sometimes they just role play it with toys at home that they could do and they have fun. Sometimes they go and do other things with guys and their wives are really turned on by it. I mean, I haven't had one story on, but I'm sure it exists where like the wife was okay with it and tried it and, got completely turned off.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure the whole gamut of experiences exists.
Yeah.
But yes. So I'm curious, in terms of the stories that you've heard about, these guys who are interested in, straight guys who are interested in being with other men, do they tend to frame the experience as being this purely physical thing, like it's just about the sex act, or are there ever emotional components that come into play as well?
Well, listen, most of the time it is just for the sex act. A lot of the times, but I definitely have had guys on my show who have the story where that's what they thought it was at first. And then they realized over time that it was more than that. Right. And maybe then they realized they were bisexual and then they were open to maybe dating guys. A lot of times with these guys that are hooking up with guys, eventually they wind up meeting a guy and maybe fall for him. I've definitely heard those stories. It can happen a lot of times, though. It is just a sexual thing. It's like when in Rome, like if it's going down and if it's there, like, and it's hot, they'll kind of do it and it's a turn on. And those are the really adamant guys where it's like, I'm not into guys at all. I know that for a fact, but like, this is what I like to do sometimes. But some guys are a little bit more experimental. And those guys sometimes do find that they not only feel like it's a physical thing, but they eventually meet someone that maybe they develop feelings. I've definitely had those stories.
Yeah. And so what you're saying there is that there can really be lots of different routes to this, right? So sometimes it might reflect some degree of sexual fluidity, which, we know people's sexual attractions and sometimes even their identities can change or shift over time. And that's just, sort of a normal part of what sexual fluidity is. And some people just naturally have more fluidity than others. And we can't always predict when or if we're going to experience those shifts or changes in our sexuality. So, I think that is part of the story here. But I think there can also be a lot of other reasons why people might engage in sexual activity that's kind of discrepant with their sexual orientation label. I had Dr. Joe Cord on the show a little while back, and we did a whole episode on gay men who have sex with women, right? Which is sort of the flip side of what we're talking about here.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. I actually know some gay men who have started having sex with women. And one of the most interesting stories I heard there was from a guy who's like, yeah, I feel like I've done everything there is to do with guys. Like, and so he just,
Exactly.
it was kind of like titillating this idea of just trying something different. And that's what being with a woman did, or what it represented. And so I think sometimes it's really just about like novelty and
pushing the envelope.
Curiosity, and pushing the envelope, So there's not always something much deeper going on, which I think is people's tendency to like, they always want to go there and say, no, they're just secretly gay or whatever. And, it's just that tendency to want to put everybody into neat little boxes.
Right. But all those stories exist, right? There is that guy that has looked back and been like, oh, and to me been like, oh, now I realize that like me just thinking it was a sexual act was maybe me not being comfortable with the fact that now I realize I do really like men, right? And they've come to that realization over time and then could look back. And then sometimes it is that guy who's just like, doesn't mean anything more. And that was the guy that I was always perplexed by, right? And I didn't understand it. And then the Joe Court sort of analogy was like, oh my God. And whenever I re-air that episode, I get so many emails from guys that are so grateful for putting into words how they feel. And, because they're even frustrated by the fact that there is no sort of term for it, right? They're not really bi, they're kind of straight, but they like dudes. But, it's a weird place to exist. But the way he explained it was like, there's sexual orientation and erotic orientation. And sometimes like if you're in the mood and you're in this moment and it's hot, you just do it, but it doesn't mean anything outside of that moment.
And this also has me thinking about some stories that I've heard too from guys. These are straight guys who were kind of like striking out with women, right? And were finding it hard to find a relationship. And that actually made them wonder, like, could I be gay? Like maybe that's what's going on here. And some of these guys have actually gone to the length of having sex with another man just to like confirm their own heterosexuality.
Oh, interesting. How many of those guys ever found out that they were actually gay?
Of the stories I've heard, there haven't been that many, but they've all been like, well, that was an interesting experience, but I'm definitely not gay. Right?
Yeah.
So. Sex is a skill, and Beducated is where you learn it. We've long treated sex as if it's something you're either naturally good at or you're not. We assume that chemistry alone should carry everything, but nobody expects you to sit down at a piano and magically know how to play. So why do we expect people to automatically know how to communicate in the bedroom and how to be a good sex partner? The truth is that good sex isn't about some natural talent that only some people have. It's about how well you've honed your own bedroom skills. That's where Beducated comes in. They offer more than 150 expert-led online courses on sex and intimacy, everything from improving oral skills to exploring erotic massage, guided self-pleasure, and even kink, all taught by world-class educators. It's educational, it's practical, and yes, it's also hot. What I really love about Beducated is that it replaces sexual myths with real education. So instead of trial and error or relying on what you picked up from pop culture, you're actually learning what works and why from people who truly know this field. So if you're ready to stop putting intimacy on autopilot, click the link in the show notes and take the Beducated quiz to receive your personalized roadmap to sexual happiness. Sex is a skill, and like any other skill, practice makes perfect.
Well, listen, a lot of those stories about the guys that I get when we go all the way back to like their first hookup with a guy, the ones that happen in high school or when they're in college or their younger years, a lot of times it's because, they couldn't get a girl to do it. You know what I mean? And their guy friend was just there and they're like watching TV together and it's just like the early access. But like, like whatever you do very early on gets wired into you, right? And so like the more they do it and they keep seeing their high school friend doesn't mean anything. They get wired into that and then it becomes something that they're into their whole lives.
And this has me thinking about this idea that I talk about in my book, Tell Me What You Want, which is that the way that I think sexuality is kind of organized in our brain is that I use this analogy of we have these two dials in the brain. And one of these dials is for the gender or sex of the people that we're attracted to, and it can be turned like all the way one direction, all the way in the other, or, be somewhere in the middle. And then we've got this separate dial that's sort of our sexual flexibility. And it's sort of the extent to which we're willing to do things to gratify or meet our sexual needs, even if they aren't necessarily aligned with our deeper attractions or our sexual identity label, right? And so some people are really high on that flexibility, other people are low, some people are somewhere in the middle. And so I think when you sort of look at sexuality through that lens, it helps us to understand why somebody who might be, let's say, a straight guy who's like very exclusively attracted to women, but he's also very high on sexual flexibility, he might be more open to this idea of exploring and trying new and different things. And so I think that's also part of the reason why our sexual identities, attractions, behaviors don't always line up in the way that people might expect.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like you're kind of saying the same thing that Dr. Joe Cord is saying, right? In a different way. And then I've heard Dr. Lay sort of explain the roller coaster thing, right? Like what you were saying too, like some people and a lot of people who are into more extreme kinds of things and kink and stuff, it's like some people are just like some people are born like thrill seekers and love to ride roller coasters and some people aren't. Everyone has a different sort of thing, right? That they're wired into. And the people that are wired into the roller coasters are, in the sex world, they're interested in pushing things farther. They need that to feel something, right? Just like the person like that loves roller coasters is the same thing. They like that thrill, they get off on it. Whereas a lot of people, like he explained, some people are just born with this need to sort of push things more, to feel them more. And those are the types of people that go after those thrill-seeking sexual experiences over the other person that doesn't. And it's not like anyone's right or wrong. It's just like who you are. I love roller coasters. The first time I brought my son to a roller coaster and wouldn't go on, I didn't understand it. You know what I mean? But he's just like a different person with different wiring than I am, right? And that's just like the way it is. No one's right or wrong, really.
Exactly. Something I want to go back to is, you mentioned a little bit earlier that you hear a lot of these stories about, straight guys wanting to explore their sexuality around midlife. And I think intuitively, a lot of people would assume this is probably something that's more like a younger guy, Gen Z phenomenon, because, we've known that rates of LGBTQ identification have gone way up among young adults and that they seem to have these less rigid ideas about sexual identity and the labels and things that we apply. But there is something interesting, where you're seeing this is happening a lot in midlife. And I guess I wanted to talk a little bit about some reasons why that might be. And, for me, the first thing that comes to mind is that when people get to midlife, like they just give fewer fucks about everything.
Isn't it great? Right? I mean, I'm in midlife, so I know it's a great place to be.
I think part of it is it's this recognition that like, hey, I have these interests or desires or things that I want to try. And it's like, if I'm not going to do them now, when am I ever going to do it? And it's like, I'm just not going to care as much about what other people think. And I'm going to explore things, my sexuality on my own terms. And, it's for this reason that I think sex in midlife is actually one of the most interesting times to study sexuality, right? Because I also see this in my research on sexual fantasies, where at midlife, people have many more fantasies about just doing new, novel, exciting, taboo, different things. And I think it is because, you have that kind of like no fucks sense of things that gives you the confidence to explore. But also so many of these people, and I'm sure this has come out in your confessions, have been involved in these very long-term monogamous relationships where maybe things have gone stale. And there's just that yearning to want to try something new and different.
Oh, yeah, totally. And it's the same for women, too. I mean, a lot of the women that have been on my show, those vanilla women that I talked about before, or the woman that was just married and with the same guy since, she got married and now she's living a non-monogamous life. I mean, she's going through the same thing where she just finally just doesn't care anymore, doesn't care what people think. I think a lot of the times when we're younger, all we care about is what everybody thinks about us, right? And the people that are midlife now grew up in a very different time than the people are living right now, right? I mean, so a lot of these people have been carrying these fantasies with them their whole life and haven't been able to really speak out loud about them. And I think by the time you get to that age, just like you said, you just don't really care. You start to realize like time goes by so fast when you're old. You know what I mean? That like, it's just going to be over in a second, like live life, right? And I love that people feel that way. And as you should, right? Why not? And I love my like way older couples that started swinging out of nowhere, like when they're 60. I love those stories too, because they're here to say that like at any time you could like sort of change things up. And I think you said it, it's not like, oh, you're born with the sexual fantasies you have and they stay the same. Like, I think, people wind up being into things that they never thought they were into way later. And to be able to have the confidence and go there and come into your own. And that's what I see in people, they really want to come into their own and be who they really are. And they learn to experience and, they're open to having experiences that they never thought they would. And they're happier because of it.
Yeah. And, we really do become different sexual beings at different stages of life, and yes, this is absolutely true across gender, across sexual orientation. But, something I see in my data is that people at different decades of life seem to be drawn to different kinds of fantasies. And it's not always in the way that people might expect. And interestingly, when I'm looking at younger adults, the fantasies they're most likely to have tend to be centered around like kink and BDSM, as well as passion and romance, right?
Interesting.
But as people get older, those fantasies kind of go down a little bit, and fantasies, around midlife tend to focus more on non-monogamy, multiple partners, trying new and different things.
Kind of makes sense.
Yeah, it does make total sense when you think about it. But
Yeah.
I think there's this stereotype of young adults is like, they're the horny kids having like all the threesomes and all this other stuff. And it's like, no, like they're the least likely to have tried a threesome and the least likely to want to do it. And, I've said this before many times, and this isn't like a slam against college students, but college students are actually the least interesting group of people you could study if you want to learn about sexual fantasies, because you need to be looking at those midlife people, because that's where it gets really juicy.
Yeah, totally. And a lot of, I would say that's the majority. I get the really young couples and I get the way older couples, but typically I'm talking to couples, I would say, in between like 35 and 55, A lot of times it's the couples that have been together since high school. I mean, that's a great foundation to have, right? Like those couples been together since the dawn of time, always monogamous, very vanilla. And just changing things up. And they're both going through it, right? It's not just the man, it's the woman, and they're going through it at the same time. And a lot of times, like I said, it's that midlife that I see that people just, whether it's a woman or the man, or, I do a fetish Friday. So I talk to a lot of guys that have fetishes, it's just like around midlife, they just don't want to keep it under wraps anymore.
Yeah.
And thank God, because I think it's hard, to live a secret life. I think it's, even guys that haven't gone all the way and been open with their partners, they didn't open things up, just opening up about your fantasies with your partner completely changes the game in the bedroom. I mean, I love a story that goes nowhere, and it's just that they role played things out, and it's like, and to me, the most interesting part of those episodes is like how they went from a couple that never talked about things to getting the balls to like bring it all up and put it all out there, and how it completely changed their life in the bedroom. And that happens all the time. I mean, you don't have to go through and do extreme things to change things up in your marriage, right? It's just a matter of maybe being more open. And a lot of times they wind up finding out that their partner has so many fantasies that they never knew that they had, right? As well as, and the partner didn't even know that they had them, right?
Yep. Oh, it happens all the time. Yeah. And, that's one of the really valuable things about talking about and sharing your fantasies is that we kind of have these ideas of what we think or what we assume our partners are into, but that might be very, very different from the reality.
Yeah. And then the partner, sometimes when they start talking about it and you bring things up, they start to realize that they're into things that they never knew. Just like you said, things change. You could wind up realizing you're into something that you never did because your partner brings it up and you start talking about it. And that's the kind of thing that completely changes the game.
So I want to go back to something that you mentioned earlier about how, even in swinger spaces, like male same-sex behavior tends to be evaluated differently than female same-sex behavior, right? There seems to be this double standard there where it's like in swinger parties and groups and so forth, like it's okay for women to play together, but not so much for men. And do you have any sense of like where that comes from and why that, seems to be so resistant to change?
I don't know. And I was shocked, honestly. Like that was something that I was shocked about. I knew that in the vanilla world, there's still that stigma, but I couldn't believe in the swinger world where people are so open that still existed. I made a comment on a Facebook group recently and posted an episode about a couple that was like that. And some guy said, it's not that there's a stigma, it's that we just don't like to see it. I'm like, maybe that's worse than a stigma to say that. You know what I mean? Like, it's like you want to control what you see in your vision when you're in a swinger club. I mean, like that, it doesn't even make sense. But I hate it and I don't understand. And I think it's like who the Maverick Men are? They're like that gay couple. They're like a porn. They became like famous porn stars. I love them. They've been on my show more than once. I knew them because I live in the city, and they're like a happy gay couple. And they were like, the whole guy on guy thing, whether it's for gay men or bi men or just any kind of guy on guy action, the stigma, they're like, it really comes down to like misogyny. And I really think, unfortunately, at the end of the day, maybe that's what it still is about, a little bit of that left, right? Like if you, like, what is a man to people? A man is like someone that loves women, you know what I mean? Like, and if you just like women a little less and one day like a man, then you're less than the man who always likes women. I don't know what it is, but it doesn't really make sense. That's why, like I said, I love when I have these really beefy alpha guys that are like here to say, like, this is what I'm into. And I'm a man, no different than any other man, right? But sometimes I like to be with men. It doesn't make you less than at all. But I think that it's just is that, and I think it's sad that it hasn't gone away. I don't understand it because, like I said, in my lifetime, it was the girl thing was not a thing that people really talked about either, but that completely changed. And it's not like there's more women out there that are into women than men. Like there's just as many men that are open to it, but they have to keep it on the DL. And even in that world, I don't understand it because it's not like the people that that are in the lifestyle that so many of them are doing it secretly, in their house and they're into it, but they can't put it on their profile. They can't advertise it at the club. There's no guy on guy action rarely happening unless it's a club that's very open to it. And that blows my mind. I think it's ridiculous. I mean, do you know what the reason is for it?
I don't know that I can pinpoint like one specific factor, but I think, you're circling around some things that are probably contributing to it. And there's probably some longstanding norms in certain swinger communities and so forth that are just resistant to change. But yeah, I mean, I think ultimately what the effect is that this double standard just only compounds the sense of shame that straight men feel when they have these same-sex attractions or fantasies. And it just makes it all the harder for them to talk about them or share them with a partner. And, if they do act on it, then it can be something where maybe they enjoyed it, but then they have this big shame response afterwards. And anytime we're talking about shame in the context of sexual fantasies, it's usually not a good thing.
Yeah, no, that's why I think it's so great that heated rivalry came out, stuff like that. And like I read the director, whoever it was that did that, said he made it very explicit on purpose. Like he wanted it to really be that way to show like the reality. And look at how women reacted. I think that was like super helpful to men who might be like, into this and afraid that maybe their wives would react a different way. And maybe they realized their wife was into it, because look at what happened. I thought it was like great. I also like, I'm very like, to me, the other thing I hate is kind of with the guy on guy thing is that I'm always like, why is like any kind of anal play when it comes to guys, like also so stigmatized, right? I love the guys that are into pegging that are on my show. I love a guy that's here to say I have prostate orgasms all the time. Like, why wouldn't every guy want to have a prostate orgasm? When I hear the way these guys explain prostate orgasms, I'm like, why isn't every guy doing it? You know what I mean? So I'm always promoting anal play, like guy and guy, whatever you're into. Like it's a very bizarre thing that's still very stigmatized too. And a lot of guys go there and have played with that part of their body and they have to keep it on the DL because that's even like a big no-no. And it doesn't make sense because it's a very, like these guys are like multi-orgasmic, okay? That's what you could have multiple orgasms with your prostate. And the stigma is like blocking them. It doesn't make sense, but that's another big thing that goes with it. And it's the same thing. It's just like this whole stigma around anal play for guys. Like, it comes back to the same thing and it's ridiculous.
Yeah, shame and stigma can really get in the way of and interfere with our sexual pleasure.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for this amazing conversation, Kathy. It was truly a pleasure to have you here. Can you tell my listeners where they can go to learn more about you and get a copy of your book and maybe give you a secret confession of their own?
Oh my God, yes. I'm always looking for people to call in. You remain anonymous. That's what I always say. I even change everyone's voices, by the way. I change everyone's voices are changed. But you could find my show, Strictly Anonymous Confessions, on any podcast app. And my book is wherever you buy books. You can find it on Amazon. It's called Strictly Anonymous Confessions, Secret Sex Lives of Total Strangers. There's like 17 very short stories in there. I tried to take like one story of each kind of thing I talk about on my show, like one swinger story, one gangbang girl story, all the kinds of topics that I talk about there. And they're true stories. That's what's kind of interesting about them, right? And you could get that book anywhere where you buy books.
Yes, and I will be sure to include links to all of that in the show notes. And I am sure everyone will love reading about all of these confessions. So thank you again so much for your time. I really appreciate having you here.
No, thank you, Justin. This was so much fun.
Thank you for listening. To keep up with new episodes of this podcast, visit my website, Sex and Psychology, at sexandpsychology.com, or subscribe on your favorite platform, where I hope you'll take a moment to rate and review the show. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, please consider becoming a Sex and Psychology Premium subscriber to enjoy ad-free listening for just $3.99 a month. You can also follow me on social media for daily sex research updates. I'm on Blue Sky and X at Justin Lehmiller and Instagram at Justin J. Lehmiller. Also, be sure to check out my book, Tell Me What You Want. Thanks again for listening. Until next time.